Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, meandering walk through marble-floored corridors where the air is thick with the kind of perfume that doesn't so much invite you closer as warn you from a respectful distance. You're not stepping into the ancient Greece of clean sea breezes and whitewashed temples. No, you're wandering into the personal space of royal women who have decided that a bath is a distant cousin to gossip, and both can be put off for weeks. The scents mingle: sweet myrrh, sharp rose oil, and somewhere underneath, the kind of human aroma that no amount of imported perfume from Cyprus can quite erase. You probably won't survive this without wrinkling your nose at least once. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, I'd love it if you'd post your location and the local time in the comments. I always find it fascinating to see where you're all drifting in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift deeper into the palace. The sound of your sandals muffled by thick rugs woven with mythic beasts. And you can already tell that bathing here is not an urgent matter. In fact, the last time water touched some of these royal shoulders might have been weeks ago. And even then, it was probably more ceremonial than hygienic. Instead, every day begins with attendants bringing trays of tiny clay flasks, each stoppered with wax. When they open one, the scent hits you like a warm, spicy breeze. The essence of rose petals distilled in oil, amber resin, maybe a hint of cinnamon if the queen is feeling exotic. They dab the perfume along the wrists, behind the ears, and generously through the hair, combing it in with ivory pins until the strands gleam. It's not just to smell nice, it's to smell rich. Perfume in ancient Greece was a kind of wearable status symbol. And if your scent lingered in the room after you left, that meant you had money to burn on imported goods from faraway lands. Historians still argue whether this daily dousing was a substitute for bathing, or simply a cultural preference for layering aromas the way we might layer accessories. But you're standing here, breathing in the combined effect, and you have your own theory. The queen, seated on a cushioned stool carved with lion paws, raises her arm so an attendant can dab oil into her armpit. You try to avert your eyes, but she catches you looking and gives the faintest smile. This is not shame, it's the opposite. In her mind, her scent is an asset, a kind of invisible cloak she can carry into court. Somewhere in the background, a lyre is plucking out a slow tune, and a tiny bronze brazier releases curls of frankincense smoke that join the perfume in a sort of olfactory battleground. You notice how the perfume clings not only to her, but to the room itself. The silk cushions smell like they've absorbed a decade of oil, each faint stain on the fabric another reminder that laundry is not a daily concern. Olive oil is a luxury, yes, but once it's on your clothes, it's not coming out without serious effort, and serious effort is not the royal mood. One of the attendants approaches you, smiling, and offers a dab from her own small vial. You can't quite say no, so she presses a drop into your palm. It's thick, almost syrupy, and when you rub your hands together, it feels like you've just moisturized with salad dressing. The scent is heady, jasmine maybe, and though it's pleasant at first, you realize it's going to cling to you for the rest of the day, whether you like it or not. Somewhere deep in the hall, you hear a sneeze and wonder if one of the guards has reached their limit. Perfume here is not just personal, it's political. When royal women attend gatherings, their scents announce them before they speak. You imagine them entering a room like walking clouds, each aroma colliding in midair. The result, a sort of fragrant chaos that might be romantic in small doses, but in this concentration, feels more like you've been trapped in an apothecary cupboard. Historians still debate how much these scents were appreciated versus tolerated. But considering the sheer volume of aromatic materials imported into Greece, someone was clearly enjoying it. There's a funny little moment when one of the younger ladies-in-waiting leans too close to the queen, her perfume mingling awkwardly with the older woman's heavier musk. You watch the queen's nose twitch almost imperceptibly, the same way someone today might react if you sprayed the wrong celebrity fragrance in a car with the windows rolled up. You realize this is a delicate ecosystem of scent hierarchies, too light, and you're forgettable, too strong, and you're offensive. Your mind drifts to a fringe tidbit you've overheard. Some women used perfume not just on themselves, but on their furniture. Cushions, couches, even the reed mats on the floor could be doused or rubbed with oil. Imagine lying down after a long day and sinking into bedding that smells like concentrated lilies, but also carries the faint whiff of 10-year-old sweat trapped beneath the oil. It's a scent sandwich, and you're not sure you'd take a bite. As you trail behind the queen, you notice her bracelets glinting in the lamplight, the gold catching every flicker of flame. The scent follows her like a pet, obedient and loyal. When she stops to speak to a scribe, you see the man shift his weight uncomfortably, perhaps wishing the audience could be a bit briefer. And yet, to refuse her aromatic presence would be a kind of insult. In a world without deodorant, without antibacterial soap, this was as close as you'd get to an intentional personal fragrance, so long as you didn't mind the underlying notes of human reality. You pass through a smaller chamber now, where shelves of tiny alabaster jars line the walls. This is the perfume store, guarded by two women whose expressions suggest they'd rather give away a crown jewel than one of these vials without permission. The jars are sealed with beeswax, some carved with little flowers or animals, others plain and practical. The air here is dense with competing scents, so much so that you feel your tongue prickle, as if the perfume is something you could taste. One of the guards reaches for a jar, unstoppers it, and offers it for you to smell. It's sharper than the others, spikenard, perhaps, imported from far-off India, traded for by merchants who braved storms and pirates. The queen uses this sparingly, for special occasions, because even she knows you can't throw this one around like rose oil. This is the scent for winning arguments or closing deals. Or, as one of the palace gossips suggests, for luring particularly stubborn allies to her side. Outside, the sunlight filters through carved shutters, scattering patterns across the tiled floor. You realize the queen hasn't bathed in weeks, yet here she is, every inch of her a living advertisement for luxury. The perfume is doing heavy lifting, masking, distracting, transforming. If you close your eyes, you might even believe she smells entirely of roses and cinnamon, until a breeze stirs and reality taps you gently on the shoulder. There's something oddly comforting about it, though. This ritual, this reliance on scent over soap, is consistent. You can imagine it happening every morning for years, attendants shuffling in with their flasks, the queen holding out her wrists, the air gradually thickening until you could almost see the perfume hanging there. You picture the smell seeping into the stone walls, so that even centuries later, a whisper of it might linger. Historians still argue whether that's romantic or just unsanitary, but standing here now, you suspect it might be a little of both. A servant passes by carrying a tray of dried herbs, thyme, marjoram, and something sharp you can't quite place. She sprinkles them onto the floor, the crunch underfoot releasing bursts of scent as people walk. It's like the palace is trying to exhale freshness through its corridors, though the effect is fleeting. Somewhere in the courtyard beyond, you hear laughter and the faint sound of water splashing. But you quickly realize it's just a servant rinsing a handful of figs, not someone bathing. Baths are for festivals or special ceremonies, not for the daily grind of ruling or being ruled. In the meantime, perfume reigns supreme. You think about how in your own time, a bottle of perfume is a personal choice, spritz and go. But here, it's practically a team sport. It takes at least 2 attendants to apply the oils properly, to rub them in without tangling hair or staining silk. The process is unhurried, meditative almost, and in that way, it's oddly soothing to watch. You can see how the queen might find it more satisfying than plunging into a cold basin of water. There's a joke whispered among the palace staff that the queen's perfume is so strong it could travel to Sparta before she does. You imagine messengers arriving in other cities a full day ahead of her just to say, "She's coming, you'll smell her first." Whether that's admiration or mild complaint depends entirely on who's telling the joke. You pause, leaning against a marble column, the scent still clinging stubbornly to your clothes. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon coos, its wings stirring the air just enough to blend the day's perfume into something new, less defined. A general haze of florals and spice and human life. You know that when you finally leave, you'll carry it with you, the way smoke lingers after a campfire. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. For the queen, scent is memory, identity, reputation. Bathwater may be scarce, but perfume is abundant. And as you step into the next chamber, the smell wraps around you again like a shawl you didn't ask for, but might, reluctantly, grow to love. You follow the queen into a shaded courtyard where the air is cooler, though not fresher. Here, you find a strange sort of preparation underway. Shallow clay bowls filled with golden olive oil set neatly on a stone bench, alongside a row of tools that look like flattened spoons with sharp edges, strigils. You watch as her attendants unlace her sandals, guide her toward one of the bowls, and dip their fingers into the oil as though about to season a salad. But no, this is the day's bath, or at least the closest thing to it. The oil is poured slowly over her arms, dripping down in languid rivulets, catching the light so that her skin gleams. You can smell it now, rich, nutty, slightly grassy, the way fresh-pressed olive oil always does. It's not unpleasant, but it's heavy. You imagine walking around coated in that layer and wonder how many bugs might view you as a personal buffet. Still, in this world, soap is a luxury that never quite took root, and this is the norm. Rub in oil, scrape it, and the dirt away. Historians still argue whether this was more effective than bathing in water, but standing here, you can see why they preferred it. An attendant takes the strigil and begins at her shoulder, pulling it firmly down her arm. You can hear the faint, sticky sound as the tool drags across her skin, bringing with it a pale sheen of used oil mixed with whatever the day has deposited there. You try not to stare too intently, because in this moment, personal boundaries feel more conceptual than real. The queen watches her own arm, as if inspecting fine fabric for flaws. When the strigil reaches her wrist, the attendant wipes it on a linen rag that has seen better days, probably months ago. You notice a younger maid hesitating with her own strigil, unsure whether to apply the same pressure to the queen's neck. One wrong move could turn this spa day into a diplomatic incident. The queen, with the faintest flick of her fingers, signals her to proceed. The scraping begins again, this time slower, and you can see the faint flush rising on her skin where the tool passes. She seems to enjoy it, the same way someone might enjoy scratching an itch you can't quite reach yourself. The oil isn't just for cleaning, it's also a beauty ritual. Olive oil is believed to nourish the skin, keep it supple, protect it from the harsh Mediterranean sun. It's a fact you've read about before, but watching it in practice, you realize it's not just about beauty or hygiene, it's about identity. A royal woman gleams, literally, and if that glow takes a pint of imported oil a week, so be it. Of course, not everyone agrees on the benefits. One of the older attendants mutters about how the oil clogs pores, how it traps the heat against the skin. Another counters that the gods themselves are anointed with oil in every temple festival. So who are mortals to argue? Historians still debate whether this practice was born of necessity, vanity, or a bit of both. But here in the courtyard, no one seems eager to skip it. The queen's hair, long and slightly tangled, is next. Oil is worked into it generously, making it shine in the dappled sunlight. You can't help but think it must feel like carrying a damp rope on your head, but the attendants treat it with reverence. Once it's coated, they take smaller strigils to scrape away any flakes of dead skin from the scalp. The sound is faint but distinct, like the whisper of sandpaper on soft wood. She sits perfectly still, eyes closed, while a thin trickle of oil runs down the side of her neck. And then there's you, standing there, starting to feel like an unoiled outsider. One of the attendants notices, grins, and gestures toward an empty stool. Before you can refuse, she's already dipping her hands into the oil bowl. You sit reluctantly, and she pours a ladleful onto your forearms. It's warm from the sun, smooth as silk, and in spite of yourself, you find it oddly soothing. The strigil follows, pulling away not just dirt, but some faint layer of unease. You glance at the linen cloth where the residue is wiped away, and decide you won't look too closely at the color. There's a light-hearted joke among the attendants that you can tell a noblewoman by the number of strigils she owns, one for the body, one for the hair, one for delicate areas that no one wants to scrape with the same tool. You decide not to ask whether the tools are labeled. A fringed detail catches your attention. Some women, after the oil scraping, sprinkle fine sand or ground pumice over their skin before rinsing it away with more oil. It's meant to polish the surface, like buffing a statue. You watch one such woman step into a corner of the courtyard, a clay jar in hand, dusting herself with pale grit before rubbing it in with a circular motion. The sound is like someone cleaning a wooden bowl. When she scrapes again, the skin beneath is pink, almost glowing, but you're not sure if it's from health or from sheer abrasion. The queen stands now, stretching slightly, her skin slick, but clean, or at least clean by the standards of the palace. Her sandals are slipped back on, and a light linen wrap is draped over her shoulders to keep the breeze from cooling her too much. She smells faintly of the oil now, a subtler scent than the perfumes from earlier, though you know they'll be reapplied soon enough. One of the attendants takes the used oil bowls away, careful not to spill them. The contents, you're told, aren't wasted. They're collected in a larger vessel, left to settle, and sometimes reused for tasks that don't involve the queen directly, lubricating chariot axles, oiling leather straps, even burning in lamps. You file that away in your mind, thinking of the strange journey a drop of oil can take from a royal shoulder to the wick of a temple light. In the far corner of the courtyard, a pair of children play with a small strigil, dragging it along the dusty ground to make patterns. Their mother calls to them sharply, reminding them that these are not toys, but you can tell she's more amused than angry. In this world, the strigil is as much a household tool as a broom or a jug. The queen, now reclined on a cushioned bench, allows her nails to be cleaned next. A small wooden stick is used to scrape underneath, followed by a dab of oil to make them shine. You think about modern manicures and realize this isn't so different, just without the soap, the polish, or the sterilized tools. The process winds down slowly, like a ritual nearing its conclusion. Each limb is padded with soft linen to absorb the excess oil. The strigils are rinsed in a bucket of water that's already gone cloudy from from repeated use, and the bowls are stacked for the next round of noble hygiene. And then comes the perfume again, lighter this time, just a dab along the neck and wrists, sealing the whole experience under a final aromatic layer. It's as though the oil was the primer, the scraping the smoothing, and the perfume the glossy top coat. As you leave the courtyard, you can still feel a faint sheen on your own skin, a whisper of warmth from the oil clinging to your pores. You suspect you'll be dustier than usual by the end of the day. But for now, you walk with the subtle smugness of someone freshly striggled. The queen walks ahead, glowing faintly in the low afternoon light, every step a reminder that in this palace, cleanliness isn't next to godliness. It's somewhere far down the hall, behind a locked door, but at least it smells nice. You trail after the queen into the warmth of the late afternoon, where the palace's inner courtyard opens into a colonnade lined with carved stone benches. Here, it seems, no one is in a hurry. The air is thick with the scent of olives, figs, and something more human, the faint tang of sweat that rides on the breeze, mingling with the ever-present perfume from earlier. You're about to step into a scene that redefines the concept of body odor. Because in this court, sweat isn't just a fact of life, it's a statement. The queen takes her seat beneath a shaded awning, her posture as regal as marble statues lining the garden paths. Around her, a circle of noblewomen gather, each draped in layers of linen and wool despite the heat. You can already see the sheen forming on their brows, the damp patches under arms, the subtle darkening of fabric along the back where it meets the skin. In our world, this would be the point where someone discreetly reaches for deodorant. Here, it's where the conversation gets interesting. They talk slowly, sipping watered wine as if they have nowhere else to be. And as the minutes pass, the air thickens. The smell is not entirely unpleasant. It's the scent of warm skin, of bodies in close proximity, of humans simply existing. But it's strong. In this culture, though, it isn't considered offensive. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greeks genuinely enjoyed the natural scent of the human body, or simply accepted it as inevitable. But in this courtyard, it's worn like a badge of leisure. If you're sweating, it means you're not laboring in the fields or straining at the oars of a ship. You're sitting here in the shade, doing important things like discussing the finer points of last night's banquet or the merits of a new style of sandal. One of the women leans closer to the queen, a streak of hair plastered to her temple with moisture, and says something that makes the group laugh. As she does, you catch a whiff of what can only be described as a biography written in scent. Layers of oil from earlier, faint perfume, and the unmistakable saltiness of a day's heat settling on the skin. You imagine that if scents could talk, hers would start with a dramatic prologue, detour into a romantic subplot, and end with a reminder that she hasn't changed her tunic in at least 2 days. A servant arrives carrying a small bronze tray with sprigs of fresh mint and basil. He offers them to the women, who crush the leaves between their fingers and rub them along their necks or behind their ears. It's a subtle refresh, more symbolic than effective, but it gives the air brief bursts of green brightness before the heat swallows it again. You notice one of the younger ladies lifting her arms slightly to let the breeze hit, and instead of hiding the dampness, she seems almost proud. This is a royal court, after all. Sweat is not labor, it's luxury. There's an odd little tidbit you've overheard. In some parts of Greece, athletes, both men and women, were known to sell their scraped-off sweat and oil to admirers who believed it had health or beauty benefits. Imagine bottling the residue from that strigil in the courtyard earlier and presenting it to someone as a gift. You try not to picture what it would smell like a week later. Whether this practice ever happened among the royal women is up for debate. But given the look on the queen's face as she fans herself slowly with a palm leaf fan, you could believe she thinks her sweat is worth bottling. The conversation drifts to matters of court gossip. You hear snippets about a visiting merchant who brought silk from the east, about a temple priestess whose hair caught fire during a festival dance. Every so often, the queen shifts slightly, and you catch another wave of scent rolling off her like a slow tide. It's not sharp or sour, more mellowed by the day's oiling, but it's there, ever present, reminding you that this is a time before anyone had even dreamed of a roll-on stick labeled Fresh Breeze. One of the older women tells a story about a long ago summer when the heat was so intense that the palace cats refused to leave the shade. Everyone laughs, but you suspect they're laughing as much to distract themselves from how sticky the air has become as from the tale itself. The queen dabs her forehead with a square of linen, then absent-mindedly presses it to the inside of her elbow as well. You wonder how many times that cloth has been used today, and whether it's absorbing anything at all, or just moving it around. There's a kind of quiet camaraderie in this acceptance of sweat. No one apologizes for it. No one tries to mask it beyond the occasional crushed herb. In fact, there's a certain intimacy in it. You're all in the same slow-moving boat, drifting on the warm current of shared heat. You think about how in the modern world, scent is something to be controlled, sanitized, managed. Here, it's just part of the landscape, like the cicadas buzzing in the distance, or the faint creak of the wooden shutters above. A small boy runs into the courtyard, barefoot and laughing, his tunic clinging to him like wet parchment. His mother calls him over, takes one look at his sweaty hair, and smiles instead of scolding. She pulls him onto her lap, and the mingled scent of child, sun, and linen folds into the air without a ripple of complaint from anyone. You realize this is a world where the human body isn't treated as an enemy to be deodorized. It's simply alive, and that aliveness has a smell. Still, you can't help but notice how the layered scents, perfume, oil, sweat, create something entirely unique, a sort of royal signature that would be impossible to replicate in a modern lab. Even the queen's throne cushion must carry it now, pressed in by the weight of her presence, the way old books hold onto the scent of their last reader. Historians still debate whether these combinations of odors were considered desirable, or just tolerated. But the way the queen sits here, unbothered, suggests she believes hers is worth remembering. A faint breeze drifts through the colonnade, lifting the edge of the queen's linen wrap. The movement stirs the air enough to bring you a more concentrated wave of scent, and you feel a strange mixture of revulsion and respect. This is the smell of a life lived without hurry, of days spent in shaded courtyards with wine and conversation instead of hard labor. You might not want it bottled, but in a way, it's almost enviable. The afternoon wears on. Shadows lengthen, the cicadas grow louder, and still the group sits, their sweat now drying into faint salt traces on fabric and skin. The queen stands at last, her movements unhurried, and the others follow, leaving behind on the benches faint damp patches that no one will remark upon. The cushions will dry in the evening air, ready for another day, another round of leisurely perspiration. As you walk away, you realize the scent is following you, clinging to your own skin from hours of proximity. It's not the perfume from earlier, it's warmer, more human, and oddly grounding. You suspect that later, when you're lying down trying to drift into sleep, you'll still catch it now. And then, like a reminder of the long, slow afternoon when sweat wasn't something to hide, but something to share, you wander into a cooler, dimmer chamber off the main courtyard, following the faint sound of combs dragging through hair. The scent here is different, less of sweat and oil, more of dried lavender and crushed herbs that have been sitting in clay jars for months. A low, cushioned bench runs along the wall, and on it sit 3 noblewomen in various states of hair maintenance, their gowns slightly rumpled from leaning back as attendants work on them. The queen is among them, her long hair draped over the lap of a servant who is dusting it liberally with a pale, flowery powder. The air blooms with the scent of this powder, an odd combination of iris root, ground herbs, and something chalky. It's meant to freshen the hair, to keep it looking clean without any water. You watch as the servant shakes it gently over the queen's head, the fine grains settling into her dark strands like a strange snowfall. The queen closes her eyes as the powder is worked through with an ivory comb, each pull slow and deliberate. You notice a faint, static crackle in the air, the kind you get when dry things rub together. It's almost hypnotic. The powder, you realize, is not just for scent, it's also for pest control. This is where the story takes a turn toward the less glamorous. The fine teeth of the comb are perfect for catching tiny, unwanted guests that make their homes in royal hair. And judging by the occasional pause and pinch of the servant's fingers, there's plenty to remove. Historians still argue whether powdered hair treatments were genuinely effective at driving out lice, or merely made them easier to find. But here, in this quiet room, you see the reality, small, almost imperceptible flicks of the wrist, as the servant plucks something from the queen's hair and drops it into a shallow bronze dish at her side. The queen, for her part, doesn't flinch. This is routine. In a world without modern shampoos, this is what hair care means. a cycle of powdering, combing, picking, and repowdering, until the hair smells pleasantly herbal and lies smooth against the scalp. You can almost hear the soft swish of powder sliding over the strands, mingling with the delicate scrape of comb teeth. Another woman nearby has gone a step further, having her attendant braid scented sprigs of lavender directly into her hair. The tiny purple blossoms peek out between the dark twists, releasing their fragrance with every movement. It's decorative and practical. If the scent is strong enough, maybe it will distract from anything less pleasant lingering beneath. You catch the faintest twitch at her temple when the comb snags, but she keeps smiling, as though enduring the occasional pull is just part of the price for being well kept. You can't help but remember an odd little fringe fact. In some Greek households, crushed garlic was used in the hair to deter lice. The thought makes you glance around the room suspiciously, wondering if that faint sharpness in the air is really just lavender and iris root. Whether the queen has ever tried it, you can't say. She certainly doesn't smell of garlic now, but the possibility is there, hidden in the long history of desperate measures. The attendants here are skilled in distraction. When they find something in the hair, they don't draw attention to it. A quick pat of powder, a shift of position, and the conversation keeps flowing. The queen is discussing an upcoming festival, her voice soft and steady, as though she's unaware, or pretending to be, of what's being removed from her head. You suspect she knows perfectly well, but chooses not to acknowledge it, because acknowledging it would shatter the illusion of royal untouchability. The powder itself leaves a faint ghost of whiteness on the darker hair, which the servants try to brush away at the end, though you can still see traces clinging near the roots. It has a certain beauty to it, like frost settling into shadowed branches. But you wonder how long it will last before the natural oils from the scalp turn it into a paste. Historians still debate whether these powders were reapplied daily or left for several days at a time. But given the amount you've just seen used, you wouldn't be surprised if they stretched it out as long as possible. One of the younger attendants catches your eye and grins, holding up her comb with a triumphant little shake, though she quickly tucks it away before the queen notices. There's a sense of competition here, a quiet pride in doing the job well, in sending their lady out into the world looking as though she's untouched by the less refined realities of palace life. You think about how invisible this kind of work is, and yet how crucial. Without it, the queen would carry not just her perfume, but an entire court of miniature citizens into every meeting. A woman across the bench has opted for a different approach. Instead of loose hair, her attendant is coiling it tightly into a bun, pinning it in place with bronze pins dipped in scented oil. As the pins slide in, they leave trails of fragrance that mingle with the powder. You imagine the scent cloud that will follow her when she leaves the room, a combination of herbal dust and sharp metallic tang from the pins. It's not unpleasant, but it's layered in the same way all things here seem to be. Never one scent alone, never one sensation. You're offered a seat, And before you can politely decline, find yourself with a small shake of powder over your own head. It settles into your hair, cool and strangely weightless, before an attendant begins to comb it through. The teeth catch now and then, not painfully, but enough to remind you that this is not just for show. The scent rises around you, soft lavender, a hint of chamomile, and you can't help but breathe it in, even as you wonder what exactly they might be searching for. When the queen's hair is finally done, it gleams in the low light. The powder worked in so thoroughly that it's invisible except in the faintest shimmer. The lavender sprigs are tucked neatly at the back, the combing dish discreetly removed before she stands. She runs her fingers through the length once, nodding in satisfaction, and you realize this has taken the better part of an hour. In a place where time is a sign of wealth, spending it on your hair is as much a display as wearing a gold necklace. The women file out into the corridor, their hair swaying, releasing little bursts of scent as they move. The air in the room feels lighter without them, though the powder still drifts lazily down, settling into the woven mats underfoot. A servant sweeps it up, careful not to stir too much into the air again, and replaces the jars on their shelves. You get the sense that this will happen again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Powder, comb, pick, perfume, repeat. As you leave, you catch sight of the bronze dish left in the shadow near the door. You don't look too closely, but you know what's inside. Tiny reminders that even queens are mortal, subject to the same small inconveniences as everyone else. The difference is that here, those inconveniences are met with scented herbs, ivory combs, and attendants who pretend not to see what they've just removed. And perhaps that's the real luxury, not the absence of problems, but the ability to make them invisible. You find yourself drawn toward a small side chamber lit by the reflection of afternoon sun, bouncing off a polished bronze disc. The light flickers across the walls like shallow water in a fountain, though the source is far more human. Here, the royal women tend to the sort of grooming that's meant to display refinement, but also makes you wonder how much grit is hiding under the surface. The queen is already seated before one of these mirrors, really more of a highly polished bronze plate than a true reflection. And she's smiling faintly at her own image as an attendant prepares a little bowl of powder for her teeth. The mirror shows her face in a warm, distorted glow. It's flattering if you don't need sharp details, but it's a poor tool for finding the bits of yesterday's meal. She doesn't seem to mind. A smear of kohl traces the edge of each eye, softening her gaze, and her lips gleam faintly with oil. When the attendant brings the tooth powder closer, you catch the scent chalky, slightly briny, with a faint edge of crushed mint. The main ingredient is ground seashells, a common choice for the wealthy, because they're abrasive enough to scrub the teeth, yet fine enough not to cause obvious damage, at least right away. Historians still argue whether these powders preserved teeth or simply wore them down over time, but the queen doesn't seem concerned about the long term. She dips a small twig, frayed at the end, into the powder and begins rubbing it along her teeth with slow, deliberate strokes. You can hear it, the faint rasp of shell, grit against enamel. She pauses to spit into a shallow dish, the powder now a pale gray paste, and resumes with the other side. An attendant fans her lightly, as though tooth cleaning were some grand performance requiring a cool breeze. The sound of that gritty brushing mingles with the quiet hum of conversation in the room. One of the younger women nearby is more vigorous in her approach, scrubbing as if she's trying to erase her teeth entirely. Her attendant shakes her head, gently urging her to be gentler, reminding her that the gods gave us only one set. You imagine the grainy powder slowly polishing away tiny layers of tooth, like waves against a cliff. It's effective, but it's not subtle. You catch a fringe tidbit drifting through your memory. Some people in the Greek world added crushed charcoal to their tooth powder, believing it would whiten the teeth. The queen, however, seems to prefer a touch of dried mint leaves for freshness. You can smell it faintly now, though it's fighting an uphill battle against the herbal perfumes still clinging to everyone from earlier rituals. Once her teeth are done, she tilts her head toward the mirror again, inspecting her face in that warm bronze blur. The attendant brings a smaller mirror, one with a more convex surface, and the queen leans closer. She runs her tongue along her teeth, satisfied, and gestures for her hairline to be tidied. This leads to the introduction of another tool, small bronze tweezers for shaping the eyebrows. The queen's brows are already thin, but fashion dictates an even more refined arch, and so the attendant begins plucking. The process is slow, punctuated by the occasional narrowing of the queen's eyes, as a stubborn hair resists removal. She doesn't flinch otherwise, though you imagine the little stings adding up. The discarded hairs fall into the same shallow dish as the toothpaste, a strange mingling of oral and facial debris that you decide not to dwell on. Nearby, another noblewoman leans toward her own bronze mirror, using a tiny reed stick to apply more kohl around her eyes. She pulls the lower lid down slightly, tracing the black line inward. It smudges a little, but instead of fixing it, she simply blends it with her fingertip, adding to the smoky effect. You realize that in a world where bathing is infrequent, makeup can double as a distraction, a frame for the eyes, a mask for minor blemishes, a way of pulling focus from less polished details. Historians still debate how much of this was personal taste versus cultural expectation. But watching them now, it's clearly both. The queen shifts again, this time leaning back as her attendant massages a little oil into her lips. It catches the light from the mirror, making them look soft and full, though you suspect the oil will also attract any stray dust in the air. In this climate, the line between glowing and sticky is thin. One of the women makes a small joke about the mirrors, saying that they're the most flattering companions a lady could have. They never show you in too much detail. The others laugh softly, though there's truth in it. These bronze plates do not judge. They soften edges, blur imperfections, and if they also fail to reveal the finer points of hygiene, well, that's part of their charm. You notice how the mirrors are handled. always polished with soft cloths before being presented, never touched by bare fingers if possible. A fingerprint would distort the view, and perhaps more importantly, betray the natural oils from the hand. It's not vanity, it's ritual care, another way of showing that these are tools of refinement, not mere household items. An attendant brings a shallow bowl of water scented with lemon balm, placing it beside the queen. She dips her fingers in, swirls them gently, and uses the cool moisture to wipe her mouth after the tooth cleaning. It's the first real use of water you've seen all afternoon, and it's over in seconds. The bowl is whisked away, the faint ripple of its surface, the only sign it was ever there. One of the younger ladies begins her own tooth routine, but instead of mint, her powder smells faintly of anise. The sweet, almost licorice-like aroma fills the space briefly, cutting through the heavier scents. You wonder if this is a personal preference or just what was available to her today. She seems pleased, tapping the frayed end of her tooth twig on the rim of the dish when she's done, leaving behind a neat little puff of powder. You're offered a turn, and curiosity wins over hesitation. The twig feels rough, but not unpleasant against your teeth. The powder gritty enough to make you aware of every surface. The mint is subtle, more of a suggestion than a statement. When you spit into the dish, you can see why the attendants are so quick to clear them away. There's nothing glamorous about what's left behind. As the grooming winds down, the queen stands and allows her attendant to adjust the folds of her gown. The mirrors are carried away like treasures, the powder dishes emptied and rinsed. The air still holds that faint blend of mint, chalk, and oil, overlaid by the persistent hum of perfume from earlier. You realize that while the rituals here might aim at cleanliness, they're as much about presentation, about the act of being seen performing care, as they are about the results. When the women leave the chamber, they carry themselves with the assurance of people who believe they have been improved, even if the changes are subtle. The mirrors remain in their niches, reflecting only the empty space until the next round of careful, imperfect grooming. And you walk away with the lingering taste of mint and seashell powder in your mouth, wondering if the faint ache in your teeth is the feeling of history settling in. You follow the faint rustle of linen and the whisper of sandals on stone into a narrow courtyard, half in shadow and half in the sharp glare of the sun. This space, you quickly realize, is devoted not to conversation or politics, but to the strange, half-ritual act of perfuming the body. The air here is thick, not oppressive exactly, but layered with the competing aromas of herbs, flowers, and something faintly resinous that lingers in your nose. The royal women are already gathered in loose formation, attendants bustling between them with small jars and bowls, each containing a different scent or texture. Queen is seated on a low stool draped with soft wool, her hair gathered up to keep her neck bare. An attendant kneels behind her with a clay flask and tilts it carefully, letting a few drops of oil fall into her palm. The oil is golden, catching the light like liquid honey, and as it warms in the attendant's hand, the smell blooms sweet marjoram with a hint of cinnamon bark. The attendant begins to massage it into the queen's shoulders, the slow, deliberate strokes pushing the scent deep into her skin. You notice a slight sheen appearing where the oil catches the sun, making the skin seem younger, smoother, even if it's only temporary. Perfuming here isn't just a matter of smelling pleasant. It's a layer of identity, a portable aura. In a world where washing with water is rare and soap is an expensive novelty, the oils do double duty. They soften the skin and mask whatever natural odors might otherwise linger. Historians still argue whether the primary goal was hygiene or seduction, but watching it unfold, you sense it's both, and perhaps more. These scents announce status the way jewels do. You step closer to a low table where an assortment of small alabaster jars is displayed like a painter's palette. Each jar has a different fragrance: rose, saffron, coriander, and one that smells oddly like freshly baked bread. An attendant lifts the lid from a squat container of frankincense resin, breaking off a tiny piece and warming it between her fingers before pressing it into a paste with oil. She offers it to one of the younger women, who dabs it on her wrists and behind her ears with a faint smile, as though the warmth alone were a comfort. Not all scents are pleasant to the modern nose. A jar of myrrh has a sharp, almost medicinal edge, and when mixed with the animal fat base oil, it creates something heavy, lingering, and if you're honest, a bit oppressive. One of the older women insists this is the most noble scent, claiming it keeps away bad spirits and insects alike. You wonder if that's a polite way of saying that the smell itself is the deterrent. The process is meticulous. Attendants don't simply slather oil on. They warm it first, sometimes over a small bronze lamp, to coax out the full aroma. Then they apply it with their fingertips, tracing slow circles into the skin, often starting at the feet and working upward. This isn't about haste. It's a performance of leisure, proof that the one being scented has the time and the attendance to make the process luxurious. You watch as the queen's feet are oiled, each toe rubbed individually, before the attendant moves on to her calves, the motion rhythmic enough to be almost hypnotic. There's a fringe tidbit floating in the back of your mind that some royal women were rumored to perfume not just their skin, but their garments, hairpieces, and even jewelry. The idea was to create a lingering trail of scent wherever they walked, a kind of olfactory signature. In this courtyard, you see evidence of it. A scarf draped over the queen's shoulders is discreetly sprinkled with a mixture of ground iris root and cedar oil. It's subtle, but as she shifts, the fabric releases a faint puff of fragrance into the warm air. One young noblewoman leans toward you conspiratorially and murmurs that too much perfume is frowned upon, as it suggests you're trying to hide something less than pleasant. But she grins as she says it, and you notice her own hands are glistening with a liberal coating of rose oil. Moderation, it seems, is more theory than practice. An attendant passes carrying a small bronze censer, the thin tendrils of aromatic smoke curling upward. This is incense, burned not for the gods today, but for the ladies themselves. They lean slightly toward the rising smoke, letting it pass over their hair and shoulders, as if the fragrance could be woven into their very strands. You've heard some claimed that this was a quick way to wash the hair without water. Historians still debate whether it actually removed odors or simply layered new ones over the old. But the women here seem convinced of its virtues. The queen, eyes half closed, lifts her hands so that another attendant can smooth oil along her arms. The scent shifts again. Now it's coriander and sweet almond, a lighter, fresher blend. You realize that each body part is treated almost like a separate canvas, each with its own fragrance. The layering creates something complex, a personal blend that can't be fully described in a single note. Occasionally, a small mishap occurs. An oil flask tips too far, spilling onto the floor. The attendants react instantly, blotting it with soft wool before the precious liquid soaks into the porous stone. Waste is not taken lightly here. These oils are expensive, requiring ingredients that may have traveled from Egypt, Cyprus, or even farther. One jar of true cinnamon oil could cost more than a servant's yearly wage. You try to imagine the sensation of walking away from this ritual, your skin heavy with oils, the air around you carrying layers of spice, flour, and resin. There's a certain stickiness to it, a weight, but also a softness that the dry air would otherwise steal away. The perfumes are, in their way, a defense against the climate as much as a statement of luxury. One older woman gestures for you to come closer, holding out her wrist. You lean in, catching a scent that's sharper than the rest, bay leaf mixed with wine lees, a combination you didn't expect. She laughs softly, saying it keeps her lively during long afternoons. Whether that's because of the smell or the faint trace of alcohol, you can't be sure. In the corner of the courtyard, a smaller, more private ritual is taking place. A young woman holds a handful of crushed violet petals, mixing them into a small dish of oil with a slender bronze spoon. She works quietly, pressing the petals until the oil takes on their color and scent, then dabbing it behind her knees and along her collarbone. She explains, almost shyly, that violets are for remembrance, and she wants to be remembered favorably by a certain someone. You can't help but wonder whether that someone will notice the gesture or simply be overwhelmed by the cloud of competing aromas. When the perfuming is nearly done, the women rise, their skin gleaming faintly in the fading sunlight. The courtyard air is so saturated now that you feel as though you could lean against it. As they depart, each leaves a different scent trail, like overlapping brush strokes in a painting you can't quite see, but can only inhale. You follow at a polite distance, your own clothes now faintly touched by whatever oils drifted close. Long after the courtyard is empty, the stone benches still hold the ghost of the fragrances, a reminder that these rituals aren't fleeting at all. They cling to every surface they touch. You inhale once more, unsure whether you feel refreshed or simply absorbed into their scented world, and wonder how many layers of history have been perfumed exactly this way before fading into the air. You find yourself in another chamber, this one dimmer, cooler, and far quieter than the bustling courtyards you've grown used to. The walls here are plastered smooth, painted in faded ochres and reds, but the scent is different, earthier, heavier, and tinged with the metallic tang of oil lamps burning low in their niches. The floor is strewn with rushes that crunch softly underfoot. This is not a public space for display, but a more private place, where the queen retreats from the constant noise of the palace. At first glance, you think it's merely a place for rest, but then you notice the low, wide basin in the center of the room, and the racks of polished bronze tools gleaming along one wall. This is where the royal women practice their cleansing rituals, the closest thing they have to what you might think of as a bath. The basin is shallow, made of smooth limestone, and filled not with water alone, but with a cloudy mixture of warm water and olive oil. You realize this isn't meant for immersing the whole body, but for standing or kneeling in, allowing attendants to work over the skin with practiced hands. One woman, draped loosely in a thin linen wrap, steps into the basin and stands still as two attendants begin pouring ladles of the warm mixture over her arms and shoulders. The oil slicks her skin, catching the lamplight in golden flashes. The attendants then pick up bronze strigils, curved, blunt-edged tools with handles worn smooth from use. You've heard of them before, in contexts both Greek and Roman, but here they're adapted slightly, the edges broader, perhaps to avoid scratching the skin. They draw the strigils along her arms, her back, her legs, scraping away the oil in slow, deliberate arcs. The motion takes with it whatever dust, sweat, or residue clings to the skin, leaving a faintly rosy freshness in its wake. The scraped mixture, oil, sweat, and whatever else is caught in shallow bowls, then poured away without ceremony. It is not a gentle process. You can see the pressure in the attendant's wrists, the way the woman's muscles flex beneath their hands. She doesn't flinch, though, and you wonder if there's a kind of satisfaction in the scraping, a physical release from the grit of the dry air and constant clothing. Once her skin has been worked over entirely, the attendants rinse her lightly with warm water poured from narrow-spouted jugs, then pat her dry with thick woolen cloths. Only then is new oil applied, lighter, scented this time, the final seal after the cleansing. There's a rhythm to it all. Oil, scrape, rinse, oil again. Each step has its own texture, its own sound, the splash of ladles, the whisper of metal against skin, the soft slap of damp wool. You find yourself caught in the pattern, the repetitive motions almost meditative to watch. Another woman steps into the basin as the first steps out, her wrap replaced with a fresh one. She holds her arms out at her sides, as if offering herself to the process, and in a way, she is. These cleansing rituals are as much about submission to the hands of others as they are about the removal of dirt. One attendant, noticing your curiosity, shows you the oil mixture before it's warmed. It's not pure olive oil, but something cloudier, infused with ground barley and what smells like fennel seed. She explains, in a low voice, that the barley helps loosen grime while the fennel adds a faint perfume and discourages insects. She gestures toward a small covered jar in the corner, which she opens to reveal a paste made from ground pumice. This, she says, is for particularly stubborn patches, elbows, heels, sometimes even the scalp. You glance at her hands and notice they are calloused from the constant work, though they move with remarkable gentleness when she demonstrates. On a bench nearby sits a set of small, flat stones with edges worn smooth. You realize these two are used for scraping, perhaps in place of strigils when a softer touch is needed. An older woman, her hair streaked with silver, sits with her feet in a smaller basin of warm oil, while an attendant uses one of the stones to rub away calluses. The scene is both intimate and entirely matter-of-fact. This is not indulgence, but upkeep, a necessity for women whose status demands a certain kind of presence. As the ritual continues, the air in the room grows dense with the scent of oil and warm skin. There is no sharp, soapy freshness here, just the rich, lingering smell of olives, barley, and herbs, the aroma of preservation rather than transformation. You understand now that this is not about becoming clean in the modern sense, but about maintaining the body in a state that aligns with the climate, the resources, and the social codes of the time. In the corner, another process unfolds. A girl, perhaps no more than 14, sits cross-legged while an older attendant works oil through her hair. The attendant dips her fingers into a small cup of oil scented with rosemary and begins massaging it into the scalp, pulling it down the length of the hair until it glistens in the lamplight. After this, the hair will be combed through with a long, fine-toothed comb made from bone, which catches any debris or pests that might be hiding. You recall how hair was often braided or wound into elaborate knots, the styles lasting for days or even weeks, with oil both helping to hold the shape and disguising any lack of recent washing. The girl tilts her head back, eyes closed, clearly enjoying the attention. The attendant hums softly under her breath, a melody that mingles with the faint echo of dripping oil. You realize that in addition to its physical benefits, this ritual is an act of bonding, a shared, repeated moment that connects these women across generations. When the basin is finally emptied and refilled, the warm liquid swirling as it settles, you step back to take in the whole scene. The glow of lamplight on oiled skin, the gleam of bronze tools, the quiet hum of voices, the steam-like wisps rising from the warmed oil. This is the undercurrent of palace life, unseen by outsiders, but essential to the way these women present themselves to the world. The glamour of public appearance is built on the foundation laid here, in this quiet, fragrant room. One last woman enters, her wrap slipping from one shoulder as she steps into the basin. She is older than the rest, her skin showing the soft folds of age, but the attendants treat her no differently than they did the youngest. Oil is poured, strigils drawn, pumice rubbed in slow circles. When she steps out, her skin shines just as theirs did, the years softened by the sheen. She meets your gaze briefly, and there's something knowing in her eyes, as if she understands that this ritual is as much a performance for those who witness it as it is a personal act. The attendants begin to clean the tools, wiping each strigil with wool dipped in warm water before drying it and placing it back on the rack. The oil basin is drained, the rushes on the floor replaced, the room prepared for the next time it will be used. The women wrap themselves in fresh linens and leave in small groups, their voices carrying faintly down the corridor. The air they leave behind is still thick with the mingled scents of oil, herbs, and skin. A reminder that even in the absence of water and soap, the body can be transformed, renewed, and presented anew to the world. When you finally step out into the brighter halls beyond, you notice that the scents cling to you too. You catch traces of fennel, barley, and olive oil in your clothes and hair, as if you've been marked by the ritual simply by witnessing it. It's a faint but persistent reminder that in this place, cleanliness is not about the absence of dirt, but about the presence of something else, layers of care, time, and craft that wrap the body like an invisible garment. You follow the scent of crushed herbs down a narrow corridor, its walls closing in around you until the passage feels almost like a tunnel. The air here is cooler, drier, carrying with it the faint rustle of fabric and the muffled murmur of women's voices. When you emerge into the next room, you find yourself in a space unlike the others, less ceremonial, more workmanlike. Here, the women are not being adorned, but prepared, their bodies tended to, with methods that blur the line between health care and beauty ritual. The first thing you notice is the table at the center, low and broad, covered with shallow baskets filled with plants, some fresh and green, others dried and crumbling to a powder. The smell is overwhelming. Sharp mint, resinous myrrh, sweet marjoram, and something pungent and almost medicinal that makes your eyes prickle. A woman seated at one end is grinding something in a stone mortar, her movements slow but deliberate, turning the pestle in small circles until the mixture becomes a thick, greenish paste. You step closer and see that it is made from fresh basil leaves and a sticky resin. And when she lifts the pestle, the paste clings in heavy strings. She tells you with a wry smile that this is for refreshing the mouth, not quite brushing teeth, but rubbed on the gums and tongue to sweeten the breath, and in her words, keep the rot away. Beside her, another woman is carefully stripping the outer bark from a bundle of cinnamon sticks, the shavings falling in curls onto a linen cloth. These will be mixed with crushed date seeds to form a coarse powder that can be rubbed over the teeth. You watch as she tips a small measure of the mixture into her palm and presses it to her teeth, rubbing with her fingertip until her gums glisten faintly. There is no rinsing, only a slow exhalation of cinnamon-scented breath. The work around you is steady and constant. An older attendant is bent over a younger woman's hand, trimming her nails with a small bronze blade. Each cut is deliberate, careful not to nick the skin, and followed by a light buffing with a smooth piece of pumice. The nails are left unpainted, but polished to a soft sheen. The attendant explains that long nails are impractical for daily life and attract dirt, so they are kept short, though for festivals they may be tinted with crushed henna leaves, giving them a reddish glow. In one corner, two women sit on low stools facing each other, one threading the other's eyebrows with a twisted length of fine cord. The process is quick and precise, the cord snapping against the skin, with each pull removing hair at the root. The woman receiving the treatment winces now and then, but does not protest. This is part of her preparation, the shaping of her face to fit the ideal form. When they are done, the skin is rubbed with a dab of oil infused with chamomile to calm the redness. You notice a long wooden chest set against the far wall. Inside, rows of small ceramic jars are neatly arranged, each sealed with wax and marked with symbols to indicate their contents. One jar is opened to reveal a thick, dark paste smelling strongly of honey and herbs. The woman who opens it tells you it is used on small cuts and blemishes, the honey drawing out infection, while the herbs, thyme, perhaps, and crushed juniper soothe the skin. She dabs some onto her fingertip and spreads it over a small scratch on her arm, then covers it with a strip of linen. The room is busy, but not hurried. There is a rhythm to the work, an understanding that these tasks take as long as they take. A young girl sweeps the floor, gathering the scattered plant stems and fallen shavings, while another refills a shallow bowl with warm water drawn from a nearby cistern. A woman kneeling by the bowl rinses her hands and forearms after handling the sticky resin, the water turning cloudy as it lifts away the residue. She dries her hands on a woven towel, then returns to her work without a word. You are drawn toward a low bench where a woman is massaging oil into another's feet. The oil is thick, golden, and scented faintly with mint and something woody. She works it between the toes, over the arches, pressing with her thumbs until the muscles yield. When she is done, she sprinkles a fine layer of powdered charcoal over the soles. She says it helps keep them dry during the day, reducing the risk of sores from long hours standing or walking. The woman receiving the treatment stretches her toes luxuriously, clearly reluctant to stand and lose the warmth in her skin. In another corner, a small brazier burns with a slow, fragrant smoke. Over it, a shallow dish holds a mixture of herbs and resin that smolder gently, releasing a scent that makes the air heavy. The smoke curls toward a woman seated beside it, her head draped in a light linen veil. She is leaning forward slightly, allowing the smoke to drift around her face and into her hair. This, you learn, is a fumigation, a way to perfume the hair and ward off lice or other pests. When she lifts the veil, her hair carries the scent, rich and resinous, and she smiles faintly as if pleased with the result. The conversations in the room are low, often in murmurs, but now and then there's laughter warm and shared between women who know each other's habits well. You realize that many of these rituals, though practical in purpose, are also opportunities for connection. The women touch each other constantly, with familiarity and care. A hand steadying a shoulder during eyebrow threading, fingers brushing hair from a face during a massage, a knee pressed lightly against another's in shared space. On the far side of the room, a different sort of preparation is underway. A small table holds several shallow dishes, each filled with powdered pigments, red from ground ochre, black from charred almond shells, green from malachite. A woman dips a slender reed stick into the black powder mixed with oil and begins to line another's eyes, the dark kohl applied in a smooth sweep from corner to corner. The recipient holds very still, eyes half closed, as the kohl is extended into a delicate flick at the outer edge. When finished, her gaze seems sharper, more defined, the whites of her eyes brightened by the dark outline. The artist then dusts a little of the red pigment onto the cheeks, blending it with her fingertip until it looks more like a flush than paint. The pigments are stored with care, covered when not in use to keep out moisture. You notice that the green malachite is handled with special caution. No one touches it directly, and the reed used for it is kept separate. When you ask, the woman explains that while it gives a striking color, it can be harmful if used too often or if particles fall into the eye. Still, for special occasions, the risk is considered worth it. The work continues steadily, each woman moving from one station to the next. Nails trimmed, skin smoothed, hair scented, eyes lined. The cumulative effect is not one of sudden transformation, but of gradual refinement, each step layering care upon care. The women emerge from the process looking not drastically different, but subtly more polished, their skin softer, their movements a little more assured. As you watch, you begin to see how this room fits into the larger rhythm of the palace. The public spaces are for display, the private chambers for rest. But here is the hinge between the two, the place where the body is shaped into its public form. The tools are humble, the ingredients drawn from garden and trade alike, but together they create an image that suggests wealth, health, and readiness for whatever duties await. When the work is done, the baskets of herbs are covered, the pigments sealed, the mortars rinsed clean. The brazier is smothered, leaving behind only a faint wisp of smoke, and the air slowly clears. The women slip away in pairs or alone, their linen wraps adjusted, their hair gleaming faintly in the light. The room grows quieter, the last sounds being the soft scrape of a broom and the clink of ceramic jars being set back in their chest. You linger a moment longer, breathing in the last traces of mint, cinnamon, and resin. You realize that though you've seen many acts here trimming nails, lining eyes, rubbing oils, what you've truly been witnessing is an entire language of care, spoken without words, in the slow pressure of hands, in the steady rhythm of scraping and grinding, in the shared breath over a brazier. When you finally step back into the corridor, the smell of the herbs clings to you, following you like a shadow. The corridor narrows again, its plastered walls giving way to smooth stone blocks, and the air shifts from the warm, herb-scented space behind you to something cooler, heavier, with the faint metallic tang of still water. The sound comes first, a slow, deliberate drip echoing against stone, followed by the sensation of moisture on your skin, a subtle dampness that makes you aware of your own breathing. You step carefully, the floor here worn smooth by countless bare feet, until the space opens suddenly into a chamber lit only by the flicker of small oil lamps set into recesses in the walls. Their flames dance against the wet sheen of stone, creating shifting patterns that seem to ripple across the surfaces. In the center lies a pool, rectangular, but with rounded corners, its edges low and unadorned. The water is dark in this light, opaque except where the lamplight grazes its surface in trembling lines. Around the pool, women move with slow deliberation, their linen garments loosened or set aside entirely. The air carries a soft steam, not hot enough to mist your vision, but enough to carry the sense of rose, cedar, and faintly of something mineral, like wet limestone. Two women kneel at the edge, scooping water over their arms and faces with shallow bronze bowls, letting it cascade back into the pool in bright arcs. Their movements are unhurried, as though the act of touching water is as much a meditation as it is a cleansing. A third woman stands waist-deep in the pool, combing her wet hair back with her fingers, her face calm and far away, her gaze fixed not on the others, but on the ripples spreading out from her own movements. The soundscape here is unlike the other rooms' less chatter, more a layering of small, rhythmic noises. Water trickling from a bowl, the creak of wood as someone shifts on the low bench along the wall, the faint splash of a foot breaking the surface. You sense that words are not forbidden here, but unnecessary. Communication happens in the shared pace, the acknowledgement of space and presence without intrusion. Against one wall, a woman tends a set of small clay jars. She dips a rounded piece of linen into one, drawing up a thick, pale paste with the consistency of softened clay. Kneeling beside another woman seated on a low stool, she begins to work the paste over her skin in long, slow strokes. It leaves a faint grayish layer that dulls the shine of water on the flesh. When she's covered the arms and shoulders, the woman steps forward into the pool, and you see the clay swirl away in cloudy ribbons, leaving her skin with a faint, warm glow. The attendant tells you this mixture is made from fine silt collected from a bend in the river upstream, where the current is gentle enough to let it settle. Mixed with crushed petals and oil, it draws out what she calls heat from the body and leaves the skin softened. In another corner, a woman sits with her feet in a small basin, her legs drawn up so that an older attendant can pour a stream of warm, scented water over them from a tall jar. The water is then caught in a second basin below, and you realize it's a deliberate act to avoid clouding the pool. There is an order to the way the water is used here, a balance between cleansing and keeping the shared space pure. Not all are bathing. A few women sit on the long bench along the wall, wrapped in light linen, their hair damp and clinging to their necks. They watch the water as if it's telling them something only they can hear, their bodies tilted toward it in quiet reverence. One of them holds a small bundle of herbs tied together at the stems, dipping it into a bowl of hot water, and then pressing it lightly against her skin, inhaling the rising scent. You can't tell if this is for fragrance, medicine, or simply comfort. Perhaps it is all three. The ceiling here is lower, and the walls seem to hold the heat in. Now and then, a drop of condensation falls from the stones above into the water below, merging with barely a ripple. You notice small niches in the wall that hold folded linens, neatly stacked and faintly scented, likely with the same cedar and rose you smelled earlier. The orderliness is striking. Nothing feels out of place, as though each action here is part of a pattern laid down long before these women arrived, one they follow without question. A pair of younger attendants moves slowly around the pool's edge, carrying bronze ladles and small bowls filled with oil. They pause at intervals, offering the oil to women leaving the water. The oil is warmed, gleaming gold in the lamplight, and carries a faint sharpness, possibly myrrh. The women take it without words, rubbing it into their skin in slow, circular motions, working it into the shoulders, the backs of the arms, the places where the muscles knot. Some apply it themselves. Others trade places and rub it into one another's backs, fingers pressing firmly, coaxing tension away. You catch sight of an older woman with hair the color of ash, her posture still upright and deliberate. She sits at the pool's edge, feet in the water, while another woman braids her damp hair with surprising speed, fingers moving with the confidence of long practice. The braid is thick, each strand catching the light with a dark gleam. When it's finished, the ends are tied with a narrow strip of linen. No ornament beyond the precision of the braid itself. You sense that this too is a kind of preparation, not for display, but for ease and comfort. A way of caring for the body's daily needs in the same breath as its ceremonial ones. Near the entrance, where the stone floor rises slightly to meet the corridor beyond, stands a tall, narrow amphora with a carved stopper. The attendant beside it offers you a small cup when she sees your interest. The liquid inside is cool and faintly sweet, tasting of dates, and something green you can't place, perhaps mint or a young leaf infusion. You realize this is part of the rhythm as well, cleansing, then cooling from within, keeping the body balanced. One woman, her hair a deep black and her skin still slick from oil, steps deliberately toward a niche in the wall where a small basin holds water as clear as glass. She cups it in her hands and tilts it over her face, letting it run down her neck. The water here smells faintly metallic, and you hear her murmur something about its strength. An attendant tells you this basin holds water from a spring believed to carry healing qualities, brought here in covered jars, and replenished only on certain days. The women leave the chamber in the same quiet way they entered, often in pairs, their linen wraps tied loosely, hair bound or left to dry against their backs. As each one departs, she passes through a smaller space beyond the pool, a kind of threshold chamber, where she stands for a moment before a large jar of dried petals and powdered bark. Here, a handful is taken and rubbed lightly over the skin before being brushed away, leaving behind a subtle, lingering scent. You realize this is the last layer of the ritual, a final mark of readiness, as much for themselves as for anyone who will meet them afterward. When the chamber is nearly empty, the attendants begin their closing tasks. One kneels to skim the surface of the pool with a broad, flat bowl, collecting floating petals and flecks of clay. Another gathers the folded linens from the niches, carrying them toward a doorway hidden in shadow. The oil lamps are adjusted so their flames burn lower, casting the chamber in a dim amber glow that makes it seem deeper, older. The sound of dripping water becomes more pronounced in the quiet, as though the room has returned to listening to itself. You step backward into the corridor, the air outside the chamber cool against your still damp skin. The scent of rose and cedar clings to you, and you feel an almost imperceptible change, not just cleaner, but as if something in you has been reset, tuned to a slower rhythm. The faint sounds of the palace return, but they no longer seem as sharp. Somewhere ahead, another space waits, its own kind of work unfolding behind closed doors. The corridor beyond curves gently, as if designed to hide what comes next until you are close enough to be part of it. The walls here are of smoother plaster, tinted with a faint wash of ochre that glows softly in the lamplight. You notice the air change again, warmer than the pool chamber, but drier, carrying the faint resinous scent of something recently burned. Your footsteps make a muted sound on the reed mats laid over the stone floor, and you feel the slight give beneath your soles, a softness that suggests this space is meant to slow movement. The curve opens into a wider room where the ceiling rises unexpectedly high, its beams dark with age. Here, the air shimmers faintly, as if layered with heat, though not stifling. Low braziers are spaced along the walls, their embers banked to a deep glow, sending up slow, twisting ribbons of smoke. The smell is not unpleasant, more like dried herbs and woods than fire itself, a blend that settles heavily in your lungs with each breath. At the far end, a broad stone platform rises slightly above the floor, and upon it, several women recline or sit cross-legged, their bodies draped in light linen or left bare at the shoulders. Attendants move between them with measured precision. One carries a shallow tray of small clay pots, each stoppered with wax. She pauses beside a woman and opens a pot, releasing a sharp, green scent that makes your eyes sting faintly. With her fingertips, she applies the thick, glossy substance to the woman's temples and down the line of her neck, massaging in slow, circular motions. Another attendant follows, carrying a pot of deep red paste, which she spreads along the woman's forearms and hands, working it into the skin until it leaves a faint stain. You realize these substances are not purely cosmetic. Their pungency suggests medicine, or at least a belief in their protective powers. Along the left wall, a group of women sit in a loose half circle around a large, low bowl of steaming water. Into it, one of them crumbles a handful of dried leaves and blossoms, releasing a rush of scent that cuts through the heavier smoke, sharp, lemony, with a hint of sweetness. They lean forward in turn, letting the steam wash over their faces, the skin of their cheeks flushing in the heat. One closes her eyes and breathes deeply, as if the vapor is carrying something into her she has been missing. When they finish, they pass around a small bundle of cloths dampened in cool water, pressing them gently to their faces before leaning back against the wall. Near the platform, a long, low table holds an array of tools and vessels: bronze tweezers, combs of carved bone, slender knives, and narrow spoons. An attendant uses one of the spoons to lift a measure of thick, golden wax from a pot kept warm beside a brazier. She rolls it between her palms until pliant, then presses it to a woman's arm and pulls it away in a swift motion, leaving behind a bare strip of skin. The woman neither flinches nor looks away from the conversation happening beside her, as though such discomfort is ordinary, even expected. In the far corner, another attendant works at a small grinding stone, her movements steady and unhurried. She sprinkles a few drops of oil onto a heap of pale powder and works them together into a smooth paste. Beside her lies a neat stack of thin reeds bound together with fiber, their tips cut to points. She dips one into the paste, then hands it to a waiting woman who bends close to a polished bronze mirror and carefully traces the mixture along the rim of her eyelids. The pigment catches the light with a faint shimmer, somewhere between green and gold, and you recall that such cosmetics were thought to guard against more than the sun. They were believed to shield the eyes from sickness itself. There is no idle movement here. Every gesture, from the way an attendant folds a strip of cloth to the pace at which water is poured from a jar, feels deliberate, part of a rhythm shaped by years of repetition. The women receiving these attentions seem both at ease and alert, their bodies surrendered to the process, while their eyes remain sharp, watching one another, exchanging glances that hold unspoken meanings. You have the sense that this is as much a space for the exchange of knowledge as it is for the care of the body. One woman sits slightly apart from the rest, her back straight, a strip of dark cloth tied around her hair to keep it from falling forward. Before her lies a shallow bronze dish filled with fine, silvery dust. She pinches a small amount between her fingers and scatters it into the air above her head, letting it drift down onto her oiled hair. As it settles, it dulls the sheen, leaving her hair with a matte, almost powdered finish. The scent that rises from it is faintly floral, but edged with something sharp, almost bitter. You realize this is not simply adornment, but a way to mask other odors, perhaps even to repel the tiny pests that thrive in close quarters. Near the right-hand wall, an older woman sits with a small wooden box on her lap. She opens it to reveal neat rows of tiny clay pellets, each no larger than a fingernail. She selects one, places it in her mouth, and bites down gently before swallowing. An attendant explains in a low voice that these are made from crushed herbs and resin, meant to freshen the breath and soothe the throat. The sharp, resinous scent lingers in the air as she speaks, mingling with the warm undertones of smoke and oil. In the center of the room, two attendants are engaged in what looks like a more vigorous form of care. A woman lies face down on a padded mat, while one attendant kneels beside her, working her hands firmly along the muscles of her back, pressing, rolling, and stretching them with practiced force. The other attendant applies oil in thin streams, keeping the skin glistening under the lamplight. Now and then, the woman on the mat exhales sharply, a sound halfway between relief and pain, and the attendants adjust their pressure without pausing. When they finish, she sits up slowly, her eyes half closed, and accepts a cloth to wrap around her shoulders. At the far end of the platform, a small brazier holds coals over which a shallow metal tray has been placed. On it, small pieces of resin are slowly melting, releasing curls of fragrant smoke. Women pass their garments briefly through the smoke before dressing again, allowing the scent to cling to the fabric. Some hold their hair over it, letting the tendrils of smoke weave through the strands. The smoke is thicker here, almost intoxicating, and you feel it catch in your throat, warm and persistent. The space hums with quiet industry, yet no one seems rushed. Even when one task ends and another begins, there is no abruptness, only the sense of a smooth shift, like the turning of a page. Conversations rise and fall without breaking the overall stillness. Now and then, a soft laugh punctuates the air, quickly swallowed by the room's warmth and the steady crackle of the braziers. When the women begin to leave, they do so in the same unhurried manner as those in the bathing chamber. Each collects her garments from where they were laid, folds them with care, and accepts a final dusting of powdered herbs from a waiting attendant. They step back into the corridor with their hair bound or braided, their skin gleaming faintly, their movements slowed as though they are carrying the room's atmosphere with them. When the last is gone, the attendants begin their closing rituals. The trays of pots and tools are carried away, their contents covered or sealed. The braziers are stirred to ensure only embers remain, the air slowly clearing of its heavier scents. The mats are rolled, the reed covering straightened, and fresh bundles of herbs are set beside the door for the next gathering. You step back into the corridor, the cooler air brushing against your skin, and find that the lingering warmth from the chamber has followed you, clinging like an invisible garment. Somewhere ahead, another doorway waits, and with it, another layer of this careful, deliberate tending to the body, the senses, and something less tangible, something that feels like the preservation of an old, unspoken knowledge. The next doorway is narrower, set deeper into the wall, and framed in dark wood carved with looping, almost serpentine patterns that twist and coil without repeating. The The surface is worn smooth in places, the ridges softened by countless touches, as though each person who passed through felt compelled to brush their fingers over it. The wood is cool under your hand, carrying the faint, dry scent of old oil. Beyond the frame, a short passage leads downward. The stone steps shallow and slightly uneven, polished in the center from long use. The air cools as you descend, though it is not the damp coolness of the earlier pools. This is drier, almost brittle, with an undertone of mineral dust. The light here is dimmer, provided only by small niches set into the walls at shoulder height, each holding a shallow clay bowl of oil with a wick that burns low and steady. The flames throw long shadows that ripple along the walls, and as you move, the air seems to thicken, the silence pressing in on all sides. The passage ends in a chamber unlike the others. Here, the floor is covered entirely in tightly fitted wooden planks, dark with age and burnished to a low sheen. The smell of the wood is strong, carrying a hint of resin and something faintly medicinal, as though it has been treated repeatedly with infused oils. Along the walls are tall, narrow shelves filled with small jars, bowls, bundles of dried plant matter, and objects whose purpose is not immediately clear. Smooth stones in varying sizes, carved bone implements, small cloth pouches tied with twine. The shelves are meticulously ordered, each item placed with care, nothing crowded or out of place. In the center of the room sits a low, square table of black stone, its surface etched with a pattern of intersecting lines that have been worn almost flat. Around it are 4 small stools without backs, their woven seats slightly indented from years of use. On the table rests a broad, shallow bowl filled with water, so still it looks like polished glass. Beside it is a stack of thin wooden slats bound together at one end with a strip of leather. And next to that, a small bundle of reeds cut to uniform lengths. A faint, earthy aroma rises from the table, the scent of dried leaves steeped in cool water. 2 figures are present here, both older women, their hair bound in tight coils close to the scalp. Their garments are simple, the linen rougher than those worn in the bathing chambers, and their feet are bare. One kneels beside the shelves, carefully selecting items and setting them on a low tray. A jar of thick black resin, a bundle of dried flowers tied with pale grass, a small dish of finely ground red powder. The other sits at the table, her hands resting lightly on either side of the water bowl, her eyes half closed, as though listening for something beyond the room. When the tray is complete, the kneeling woman brings it to the table and places it with a kind of reverence. They begin to work together in silence, moving with the unhurried certainty of people who have done this for decades. The resin is scraped into a small clay cup and softened with drops of oil poured from a narrow-spouted vessel. The red powder is stirred into another cup with water until it forms a paste of deep, earthy color. The flowers are stripped of their petals, which are crushed between the fingers, and added to the first mixture, releasing a sharp, almost metallic scent. You realize as you watch that the two women are not working toward a single preparation, but several, each made separately, each handled with a different rhythm and touch. Some are stirred slowly, others kneaded between the palms, others ground firmly with a pestle until their texture changes. Each time they complete one, they set it aside on the far end of the table, grouping them according to some logic not immediately visible to you. On the shelves behind them, certain spaces stand empty, small rectangles of dust-free wood where something has been taken for use. These gaps form a pattern of their own, and you get the impression that the placement of each item matters as much as its substance. This is not a storeroom in the ordinary sense, but a place where arrangement itself is part of the work, where knowing where something belongs is as important as knowing what it does. The women speak only once, and even then, in voices so low that their words are more like breath than sound. One asks a question, the other responds with a short phrase, and both return to their tasks without further exchange. You suspect they could work here without speaking at all, their shared understanding deep enough to make speech unnecessary. After some time, one of them rises and crosses to a small brazier in the corner. She opens a lidded jar, scoops out a measure of pale granules, and scatters them over the coals. At once, a thin, aromatic smoke begins to rise, lighter and drier than what you encountered earlier. It curls upward in delicate spirals, filling the air with a scent that makes your tongue tingle faintly. The smoke does not drift far before dissipating, as though the room absorbs it. The other woman begins to pour the prepared mixtures into narrow clay tubes, sealing each with a plug of wax. She handles them as if they are fragile despite their solid feel, placing them in a wooden box lined with woven cloth. When the box is full, she closes the lid and binds it with a strip of leather, setting it carefully on the lowest shelf. The act feels ceremonial, though there is no visible sign of ritual, no gesture, no word, only the care in her movements. From a shelf near the floor, the first woman retrieves a shallow basket containing several small, smooth stones, each about the size of a walnut. They are pale gray, almost white, and cool to the touch when she places one in your hand. You notice faint grooves running along their surface, worn into the stone by repeated handling. She nods toward the water bowl on the table, and you understand you are meant to place the stone into it. When you do, the surface ripples outward in perfect circles before settling again, the stone disappearing beneath the water. There's a pause, as though they are waiting for something only they can perceive. The woman at the table leans forward slightly, her eyes fixed on the water, and for a moment the lamplight seems to catch on something below the surface, a faint glimmer, gone almost before you can register it. She nods once, satisfied, and gestures for you to take the stone back. When you retrieve it, it is no longer cool, but faintly warm, as though it has absorbed something from the water. They return to their work without explanation, but you sense that this was not merely a demonstration. The warmth in the stone lingers as you hold it, and the grooves feel deeper now, as if they have shifted slightly under your fingers. Eventually, the women begin to tidy the space, replacing each tool and vessel on its shelf, sweeping the wooden floor with a short broom, whose bristles are bound tightly into a fan shape. The brazier is banked, the coals covered until only the faintest wisp of smoke escapes. The oil lamps in the wall niches are left burning, their small flames steady in the still air. When they are finished, one of them opens a narrow door in the far wall, revealing another passage. It is taller and narrower than the one you entered through, and it slopes gently upward. The air here is warmer again, tinged with a faint sweetness, and the light ahead is brighter, as though the next space lies closer to the outside world. You step into the passage, feeling the wooden floor give way to smooth stone once more, the echoes of your steps returning. The warmth grows with each pace, and the scent of herbs becomes stronger, layered with something richer, like honey left in the sun. The corridor opens gradually, the walls spreading apart until you find yourself standing at the threshold of a long, high hall, unlike any space you have yet seen. Would you like me to continue directly with the next 2,000-word section of this scene? The hall stretches ahead in a slow curve, so long that its far end disappears from view. The ceiling is high and vaulted, supported by great ribs of pale stone that rise in sweeping arcs before meeting at a narrow crest above. Between each rib, narrow slits are cut into the upper walls, admitting thin shafts of sunlight that fall like angled columns onto the floor below. The light is softened by what must be some kind of translucent covering, diffusing it into a warm, golden glow that makes the air seem thicker, almost tangible. The floor is made of wide, pale tiles, each inlaid with faint, looping designs that shimmer faintly as you move, as though the lines were not merely carved, but infused with some substance that catches the light differently than the surrounding stone. These patterns do not repeat in any obvious way. Each tile seems to be part of a larger, continuous design that only reveals itself if you step back far enough, though the curve of the hall prevents you from seeing it all at once. Along the outer wall, at regular intervals, are tall alcoves framed in the same pale stone. Each holds a large, shallow basin of hammered metal, its surface rippled with delicate indentations that make it glimmer like a pool of still water. Within each basin lies a mound of some golden granular substance, like coarse sand mixed with tiny flakes of metal. The scent of the hall comes strongly from these, sweet, resinous, and faintly sharp, a mixture that makes your mouth water even as it pricks at the back of your throat. On the inner wall, the alcoves hold something entirely different. Tall, narrow panels of dark wood carved with scenes, so intricate they seem almost to move when the light shifts. The figures in these carvings are elongated, their limbs flowing like water, their garments depicted as if in constant motion. Some carry vessels, others stand beside strange devices, and some simply watch, their faces turned towards something beyond the panel's edge. At the base of each panel, small offerings have been left: bundles of dried herbs, bowls of fruit, small carved figures of bone or stone. None of them look decayed. Someone tends to them regularly. As you walk deeper into the hall, you realize you are not alone. Figures move slowly along its length, some in groups, others alone, their steps unhurried. They wear robes of varying colors, some in pale hues like sand and cream, others in deep tones like rust, indigo, and forest green. The fabrics are simple, but finely woven, the folds falling heavily as though the cloth is dense. Their hair is worn in many styles, shaved entirely, braided close to the scalp, or bound into coiled knots at the crown of the head. No one speaks loudly here. Conversations are quiet, carried out in voices low enough that you cannot catch the words, even when passing close. Most of the movement in the hall seems purposeful, but without urgency. People pause to study the panels, to place something in the basins, to stand with their eyes closed for long moments before moving on. Near the midpoint of the hall, the inner wall gives way to a series of low platforms arranged in a crescent, each covered in mats woven from reed and grass. The mats are dyed in muted patterns, their colors worn by time, but still discernible: spirals, waves, interlocking diamonds. A group of 6 people sits cross-legged on the mats, each with a shallow bowl before them. The bowls are filled with the golden granular substance from the basins, and they move their hands through it slowly, sifting and shaping it into small mounds and channels. It looks almost like play, but their expressions are focused, their eyes lowered in concentration. Every so often, one of them uses a slender stick to carve a symbol into the surface before smoothing it away again. On the far side of the platforms, a narrow stairway of polished wood leads upward to a mezzanine that runs along the inner curve of the hall. The railing is low and carved with the same looping, fluid patterns you saw in the doorway earlier. From here, you can see down into the hall from above, and also look out through narrow openings that reveal glimpses of what lies beyond the structure. You catch flashes of green and silver, foliage stirred by wind, sunlight glinting on moving water. But the view is always partial, framed by the curve of the wall. You descend again to the main floor and continue along the hall. The curve tightens gradually, and the golden light begins to change. It becomes warmer, deeper, with a reddish undertone, as though the sun outside has shifted in position, or the translucent coverings above have been tinted. The scent in the air changes with it, gaining a richer, almost spiced note that lingers at the back of the tongue. Ahead, the hall opens into a circular chamber with no visible roof. Instead, high above, a wide ring of open sky is framed by the stone walls, the light pouring down in an unbroken column that strikes the center of the floor. Here, a wide, shallow depression has been carved directly into the stone, its surface etched with concentric circles that radiate outward from the center. The grooves are deep enough to hold liquid, and indeed, a thin layer of clear water fills them, catching the sunlight and scattering it across the surrounding walls in bright, shifting patterns. Around the perimeter of this chamber, low benches are arranged in a ring, their surfaces polished to a dull sheen. Several people sit there now, their eyes fixed on the water at the center. No one speaks, but the silence here feels different than in the hall. It is not merely quiet, but charged, as though something in the air hums just below the threshold of hearing. You step closer to the central depression, and as you do, the water shifts slightly, though there is no breeze and no one else has moved. The ripples seem to move outward and inward at once, defying the normal pattern, and the reflections on the walls dance more wildly for a moment before settling again. The effect is disorienting, as though you are momentarily unsure whether you are moving toward the water or it is moving toward you. One of the seated figures rises and approaches the edge opposite you. Without looking up, they dip their hand into the water, scoop some up, and let it fall back in a slow stream. The ripples spread outward, perfectly symmetrical despite the asymmetry of the act, and the figure returns to their seat without a word. You realize that everyone here moves with the same economy of motion, as though their gestures are guided by something unseen. From a narrow archway in the wall, a pair of attendants emerges carrying a shallow tray between them. On it rests a single vessel of pale, unglazed clay, shaped like a squat jar with a wide mouth. They bring it to the edge of the depression and lower it carefully into the water until it fills, then lift it out and carry it away. The whole process takes less than a minute, but it feels as though it has some larger significance, one that you cannot yet read. After a time, you notice another opening on the far side of the chamber, this one taller and darker than the rest. The light within is dim and tinted, not from the sun, but from some other source. As you move toward it, the warmth of the open chamber gives way to a cooler, more enclosed atmosphere. The passage beyond is narrow and lined with panels of woven material stretched over wooden frames. These panels muffle the sound of your steps and make the air feel thicker, as though sound and motion are absorbed by the walls. The passage ends in a small, octagonal room lit by hanging lamps of deep red glass. The light they cast is soft and diffuse, turning the walls and floor a muted crimson. In the center of the room stands a single tall object covered by a cloth of heavy, dark fabric. The cloth falls in straight lines to the floor, hiding the shape beneath entirely, though its outline suggests something angular, perhaps a frame or stand of some kind. 3 people are here, standing equidistant around the object. They are dressed in plain dark garments with no adornment, their hair bound tightly at the nape of the neck. Their hands are clasped before them, and their eyes are closed. When you enter, they do not look up, but you feel the air shift slightly, as though your presence has been noted without acknowledgement. One of them begins to speak in a slow, rhythmic voice. the words unfamiliar, yet carrying a cadence that makes them easy to follow in sound, if not in meaning. The other two join in after a few breaths, their voices blending into a low, resonant hum that seems to make the air tremble. The sound grows not louder, but denser, as though it is filling the room in layers, wrapping around you without pressing. As the hum continues, the cloth over the central object stirs slightly, though there is no draft. It lifts and settles in a slow, pulsing motion, almost as if the object beneath is breathing. The voices hold steady, their rhythm unbroken, and the air in the room seems to take on weight. You feel it in your chest, not unpleasantly, but with the sense that if it continued much longer, it would begin to change something in you. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound stops. The room is left in a silence, so complete it feels as though the air has been drawn out. The three open their eyes, and one steps forward to lift the cloth. Beneath it stands a tall, narrow frame of dark wood, holding a panel of what looks like polished black stone. The surface is utterly smooth, but as you look at it, faint shapes begin to emerge, shadows of movement, suggestions of forms that vanish when you try to focus on them. No one explains, but you understand instinctively that whatever you are seeing is not a reflection, and that it shows not what is around you now, but something else entirely. The figures on the panel shift slowly, like people walking far away, their outlines blurred. Then the surface clears again, and you are left staring at your own faint outline, not in detail, but as a pale silhouette in the dark. The cloth is lowered once more, the panel hidden from view. The three return to their places, closing their eyes again, and you sense that whatever you have been shown is all you will be given here. The air seems lighter now, the weight lifted, and the faint sound of the hall beyond reaches you again. You turn back to the passage, feeling the red light fall away as you step toward the brighter gold beyond. The curve of the hall is waiting, and somewhere past it, more chambers you have not yet seen. The curve of the hall feels subtly different now, as though you are walking along a path you have taken before, but in a dream, where details shift and refuse to stay where you expect them. The light from the high slits is softer here, almost silvery, and the scent in the air changes again, becoming lighter, more astringent, as if carried from some open, windswept place far above. The alcoves along the walls grow deeper, their contents more varied. Some hold tall, narrow jars sealed with wax, their surfaces covered in looping inscriptions that seem to move when you look at them too long. Others contain delicate arrangements of dried flowers, their petals twisted into spirals, or stones so smooth and polished they reflect the dim light like mirrors. You pass a pair of attendants moving in the opposite direction. They carry between them a low table of carved wood, on which rests a large shallow dish filled with something that glows faintly, a pale green radiance like light through new leaves. The source is not obvious. It could be the contents of the dish, or perhaps the surface beneath it, though both appear unremarkable at first glance. The attendants keep their eyes lowered and their pace steady, not hurrying but not pausing either, and the glow fades behind you as they pass. Farther along, the outer wall of the hall begins to open intermittently into narrow balconies. Each is guarded by a low railing of carved stone, beyond which the view drops away sharply into a vast expanse. From here, you can see a wide plain stretching far into the distance, its surface broken by slow, winding rivers that gleam like silver threads under the sky. The land seems almost too still, as though caught between moments, and even the drifting of clouds above feels deliberate, each shadow moving with impossible slowness across the plain. A soft sound draws your attention back inside. The faint chime of metal struck gently, coming from an alcove where a figure in pale robes stands before a series of suspended discs. The discs are arranged by size, from the width of a coin to the breadth of a shield, and each is made of a different metal, some bright and golden, others dark and burnished. The figure touches them one by one with a slender rod, coaxing from each a note that lingers faintly in the air, overlapping with the next, so that they form a slow, unbroken sequence. The effect is hypnotic, like following a trail of overlapping ripples across still water. The hall begins to slope downward, so gently that you notice it only after several steps. The tiles underfoot grow darker, shifting from pale stone to something richer and more varied in tone, each piece veined with subtle streaks of copper and silver. The patterns here are less abstract than before. You begin to see shapes that resemble flowing water, curling leaves, and unfurling wings. The inlays shimmer faintly as you move, and the air feels warmer again, though in a different way than in the sunlit chamber. It is the warmth of enclosed spaces, of breath and presence. Ahead, the curve of the hall opens into a long, narrow room lined entirely with shelves. The shelves are carved directly into the stone walls and rise from floor to ceiling, each filled with objects wrapped in cloth, bound with string, or sealed in small boxes. The arrangement is meticulous, no dust, no signs of disorder, yet nothing is labeled in any language you recognize. Small symbols have been painted directly onto the stone above each shelf, their forms unfamiliar, but clearly meaningful to those who know how to read them. Several people move quietly through the room, their steps muffled on the stone. Some carry small ladders to reach the higher shelves. Others bring items to low tables set in the center of the space, where they unwrap and examine them in silence before wrapping them again. You catch glimpses of the contents. A fan of feathers so black they seem to swallow light. A coiled length of rope woven from something finer than hair. A flat disc of translucent stone etched with tiny, perfect lines. No one appears to be taking or giving instructions. The work flows with an unspoken rhythm, each movement fitting seamlessly into the whole. At the far end of the room, a narrow archway leads into a smaller chamber where the ceiling dips low. Here, the shelves give way to niches holding larger objects, carved figures of wood and stone, intricate metalwork, large panels painted in deep, layered colors that seem to shift when you tilt your head. In the center of the room, a long, low table holds a single object, a sphere of clear material, perfectly smooth and about the size of a human head. Inside the sphere floats a faint haze that moves slowly, curling and stretching like smoke in water. You have the sense that if you watched long enough, the haze would form shapes you could recognize, though none hold for more than a moment before dissolving. You leave the room and rejoin the hall, which now curves upward again. The incline is steeper than before, and the light changes quickly as you ascend, first dimming, then brightening again until you step into a space suffused with a cool, white glow. This light does not come from above, but from the walls themselves, which are made of some pale, translucent material shot through with faint, branching lines like frost on glass. The hall here is narrower, the ceiling lower, and the sound of your footsteps changes, becoming sharper, more resonant. After several dozen paces, you reach a threshold unlike the others. The doorway is framed by two tall columns carved in the likeness of intertwined vines, their leaves rendered so finely that you can see the veins in each. Between them hangs a curtain made not of fabric, but of thousands of thin, overlapping plates of shell or polished stone, each no larger than a fingernail. They shift slightly in the air, producing a sound like rain on a distant roof. Pushing the curtain aside, you step into a chamber so vast it takes a moment to understand its scale. The floor is a wide, shallow basin filled with a thin layer of water that mirrors the space above. Narrow stone walkways crisscross the basin, their surfaces just above the waterline. The walls rise high, curving inward to meet in a great dome overhead, which is covered in countless tiny openings. Through each, a thread of light falls, together forming a shifting constellation on the water's surface. Figures move along the walkways, their reflections fractured by the water's ripples. Some carry small vessels, dipping them into the water and then moving on. Others pause at points where the light falls most brightly, kneeling to press their palms flat against the stone before rising again. The atmosphere is hushed, but not solemn. There is a sense of ongoing, unbroken work here, as though the room has been in use for longer than memory. At the center of the basin, the walkways converge on a circular platform where a single column rises from the water to the dome above. The column is covered in intricate carvings, not of vines or waves, but of interlocking geometric shapes that seem to twist into new forms as you move around them. At the column's base, a wide band of darker stone circles it like a collar, engraved with deep grooves that hold a faintly luminescent liquid. You approach one of the walkways and step carefully across, the sound of the water lapping against the stone keeping time with your movements. The air here feels cooler and cleaner, carrying a faint mineral scent, as though drawn from deep underground. You stop halfway across to look down into the basin. Though the water is shallow, it is so clear you can see the carved patterns on the stone floor beneath, each one unique and oriented toward the center. From the far side of the chamber, a low sound begins to rise, a tone not unlike the ones you heard from the suspended discs earlier, but deeper, more resonant. It comes not from a single point, but from many at once, as though the stone itself is singing. The tone swells, layering with others, until it becomes a complex harmony that seems to vibrate through your bones. The light above shifts in response, brightening and dimming in time with the sound, so that the reflections on the water move like breathing. The figures on the walkways pause in their tasks, some bowing their heads, others closing their eyes. The harmony continues for several breaths before fading again into silence, leaving the sound of the water and the faint rustle of movement in its wake. You find yourself unsure whether minutes or hours have passed since you entered. Beyond the chamber, another doorway leads into a narrow, spiraling passage that climbs steadily upward. The walls here are bare stone, unadorned, and the air grows warmer as you ascend. The spiral ends in a small, round room open to the sky through a wide, circular gap at its center. Around the gap runs a low parapet, and beyond it you can see the plain stretching away in all directions, the rivers glinting in the light. Set into the floor is a circular pool, no wider than your outstretched arms, its water dark and perfectly still. The surface reflects the sky above so clearly it is as though the pool is a hole cut into the floor. You kneel beside it and peer down, half expecting to see your own reflection. But instead, you find the image subtly altered, clouds moving differently than they do above, light falling at a different angle, as if the water is showing not the present, but another time entirely. A faint wind stirs the air, carrying with it the sense of distant rain and warm earth. The quiet here is absolute, broken only by the soft hiss of wind over stone. You have the sense that this place is meant for looking outward, not inward, though the distinction between the two feels increasingly thin. You rise and take one last look at the shifting landscape below before turning back toward the spiral. The long curve of the hall waiting once more. The spiral descent is steeper this time, the air cooling as you go. The stone under your feet feels faintly damp, and the walls bear shallow grooves, as if worn by countless hands over ages. At first, the sound is only the whisper of your own movements, but gradually, a low, steady rush begins to filter upward, too rhythmic to be mere wind. It grows louder as you descend, resolving into the unmistakable murmur of flowing water, yet deeper, as though channeled through great hollows. The final curve opens into a cavernous chamber that is at once natural and shaped, its ceiling rough and uneven, but its floor a wide expanse of smoothed stone. At the far end, a river pours in from a high fissure, its fall broken into countless thin threads by a lattice of carved stone set just inside the opening. The water spreads out into a broad, shallow channel that cuts the room in two before slipping away into another dark passage. Its surface catches the dim light of crystals embedded in the walls, each glowing faintly in shades of blue, green, and pale amber. The light scatters on the ripples, so the whole channel looks like a shifting map of stars. Figures move silently along the edges of the water, each carrying small, shallow trays. They lower these into the current, hold them there for a time, then lift them out and carry them to low tables at the chamber's edges. There, the contents, tiny, glimmering fragments of something, are sorted with meticulous care, placed into bowls of varying size. No words are spoken, but the work is unhurried and constant, like the river itself. A wide stone bridge spans the channel, its sides carved with patterns that flow like waves meeting in the center. The surface is slightly worn in the middle, polished by the steps of many who have crossed before you. From its midpoint, you can look down and see the water's slow, deliberate turbulence, as if it is reluctant to move too quickly past this place. You can see larger shapes under the surface, as well smooth, dark stones whose edges catch the crystal light when the current shifts just so. Beyond the bridge, the chamber narrows into a long gallery where the ceiling lowers again. Here, the walls have been left almost entirely bare, except for one continuous groove running at shoulder height along both sides. At irregular intervals, shallow bowls have been set into the groove, each holding a small pool of still water. The bowls vary in shape and material. Some are polished stone, others hammered metal, others pale, fine ceramic, but all reflect the dim light in the same way, their surfaces holding it as if it were denser than air. You pause at one, looking down into its mirror-smooth surface. Instead of your reflection, you see a faint image of the river chamber you just left, viewed from some impossible angle above the lattice where the water enters. The light glints off the falling threads differently here, as though captured in another moment entirely. At the next bowl, the image is not of the river, but of a high balcony overlooking a forest, the leaves below trembling in a wind you cannot feel. Each bowl shows a different scene, though all share the same muted, almost dreamlike quality. Gallery ends in a tall, narrow doorway through which a pale golden light spills. You step into a long hall whose walls are lined with tall panels, each made of a different material: wood, stone, metal, even thick glass. The panels are arranged not for symmetry, but for some other principle you cannot discern, their surfaces etched, painted, or inlaid with intricate designs. Some depict landscapes, others abstract forms, and still others patterns that seem to shift depending on the angle you view them from. Along the center of the hall runs a series of shallow steps, rising and falling in a slow rhythm, as though echoing the curves of the land outside. Small, unshaded lamps sit on the steps at intervals, their flames steady and giving off no visible smoke. Their light mingles with the golden glow from the walls, so that there are no shadows here, only gentle gradations of brightness. You notice now that the air carries a faint scent, something resinous and warm, like pine or cedar, though subtler, threaded with a sweetness you cannot name. The sound here is minimal, a soft hum that you cannot place, as if the hall itself is resonating at a pitch just low enough to be felt rather than heard. The hum deepens slightly as you walk, then recedes again, almost in time with your steps. At the far end of the hall, a wide arch opens into a circular chamber, whose floor is covered in a mosaic unlike any you have seen here before. Instead of stone or tile, it is made entirely of overlapping scales, some metallic, others iridescent, still others a deep, matte black. They are arranged in flowing, concentric patterns that ripple outward from the center, where a low pedestal supports a single object, a long, narrow vessel of dark glass. The vessel is sealed with a band of hammered silver, engraved with a pattern of interlocked lines. Inside, something moves, not liquid exactly, but a shifting, translucent mass that seems to change color as it flows, from pale blue to deep violet to a green so dark it is almost black. The movement is slow and steady, but it has a purpose to it, as if the thing within is tracing paths only it can see. Around the edges of the chamber, niches hold other vessels of varying shapes and sizes, though none quite like the one in the center. Some are opaque, some perfectly clear, some rest on carved bases. Others are suspended from the ceiling by fine chains. Each contains something liquid, mist, small moving shapes, or simply darkness, but none are labeled or marked. The chamber has a stillness to it, as though everything here is waiting for something, and that something is not yet due. A narrow, unadorned passage leads out of the chamber, sloping gently downward. The light fades as you walk, until the only illumination comes from thin seams in the floor, where a faint white glow seeps through. The seams trace patterns that at first seem random, but soon reveal themselves to be connected, converging ahead where the passage opens into a space so dark it takes your eyes a moment to adjust. When they do, you see that you are standing at the edge of a vast pit, its bottom lost in shadow. The seams of light in the floor here continue down the walls of the pit in straight, unwavering lines, vanishing into the depths. Across the gap, another ledge mirrors the one you stand on, connected by a narrow bridge of the same faintly glowing material. The air is utterly still, and your footsteps sound unnaturally loud as you cross. Halfway over, you glance down and see movement, slow, rolling shapes far below, too distant to make out clearly. They seem to shift in and out of the light from the seams, appearing solid one moment and insubstantial the next. By the time you reach the other side, they have vanished into the darkness again. The passage beyond the pit winds upward in a long, unbroken curve. The walls are smooth here, almost polished, and faintly warm to the touch. After some distance, the curve straightens into a broad corridor that opens onto a terrace. From here, the view is unlike the one you saw earlier. The plain below is closer, the rivers sharper and more defined, and beyond them rise low hills covered in a strange, pale vegetation that seems to catch and hold the light in shifting colors. Set into the terrace's floor are a series of shallow basins filled with fine sand, each carefully raked into a different pattern of concentric circles and radiating lines. Small stones or fragments of crystal are placed at precise points within the patterns, and the slightest breeze sends tiny cascades of sand sliding around them, altering the designs subtly but continuously. Figures move slowly among the basins, using slender wooden tools to adjust the lines, though never in the same way twice. On the terrace's far side, a short flight of steps leads into a domed chamber open at the top. Through the opening, the sky is visible cloudless, but filled with a pale, steady light that does not seem tied to the sun's movement. Suspended in the center of the dome is a structure made of countless thin rods and threads, forming a shape too complex to take in all at once. Some parts catch the light, others seem to absorb it entirely, and when a breeze passes through, the whole structure sways almost imperceptibly, casting shifting patterns on the floor below. Beneath it, a circular table holds a number of small, flat objects arranged in a spiral. Each is made of a different material: wood, bone, metal, stone, glass, and each is carved or etched with a design that draws the eye inward. Some are clearly abstract, others resemble maps or diagrams, and a few seem to depict the same shape from different perspectives. None are labeled, yet the arrangement suggests a progression, as though they tell a story without words. From here, a narrow stair leads downward again, vanishing into shadow. The sound of running water returns, faint at first but growing clearer, mingled with a rhythmic, almost musical tapping. You follow it down, the air becoming cooler and damper, until you emerge into a low chamber where thin streams trickle from the walls into shallow stone basins. The tapping comes from small wooden rods suspended above the basins, each dripping water onto a hollow vessel that resonates with a soft note. The drops fall at varying intervals, creating an unending, shifting melody. Figures sit cross-legged on the floor, listening. Their eyes are closed, their breathing slow. None speak, and the sound of the dripping fills the space entirely, each note distinct, yet part of the whole. You find yourself slowing your own breath to match the rhythm, without meaning to, until the room and its sound feel as though they have settled into you as much as you into them. When you finally rise and step back into the passage, the sound follows you for some time before fading. The corridor ahead bends once more, and you realize you have lost any sense of how far you have traveled or how long you have been here. The place seems endless, and yet each turn feels deliberate, as though leading you somewhere you have not yet imagined. The corridor narrows until the walls are close enough that you could touch both at once if you stretched out your arms. The surface here is different, no longer stone, but something smoother, with the faint give of a material not entirely solid. It is warm beneath your fingertips, and as you move forward, you notice that it subtly shifts in texture, small ridges rising and falling like the ghost of a breath. The light is dim, coming from a thin line running along the ceiling, but it pulses softly in time with the movement of the walls, as though the space itself is alive. The floor begins to slope downward, and the sound of your steps changes, taking on a hollow resonance. The warmth fades gradually, replaced by a cooler breath of air that smells faintly metallic. The slope steepens, and ahead you see a faint glow, this time not from above, but from below. The corridor opens abruptly into a platform, suspended over a wide shaft. The platform is ringed by a railing made of interwoven metal strands, and the floor is a lattice through which you can see the space beneath. Far below, the walls of the shaft are lined with vertical channels, each filled with a slow, downward-moving current of faintly glowing particles. They shimmer like dust in sunlight, but they fall in perfect, unbroken columns, vanishing into darkness. The air hums faintly, the vibration felt more in your bones than in your ears. Across the shaft, another platform mirrors yours, connected by a bridge so narrow it seems little more than a strip of woven metal. You cross it carefully, the hum growing stronger until it seems to pass through you entirely. The glow from below paints shifting patterns on the underside of the bridge, as though the particles were casting their own light upward in defiance of their fall. On the far side, the platform leads into a tunnel whose walls are studded with countless small, round openings. Each opening is just large enough to peer into, and as you pass the first, you glance inside. Within is a small chamber no bigger than a cupboard, and in it hovers a shape neither entirely solid nor entirely light. It shifts constantly, folding and unfolding in on itself, colors flashing briefly before fading into transparency. You move to the next opening, and there the shape is different. A slow-turning spiral that seems to recede endlessly inward, drawing the eye but never revealing a center. In another, a shape that appears at first to be still, until you realize it is rotating in more directions than you can name. None of them make a sound, but the air around each opening feels subtly different, as though charged. The tunnel curves and dips, and eventually the openings vanish, replaced by smooth walls once more. The floor levels out, and you come into a wide, low room supported by rows of thick columns. The columns are carved with twisting designs, some deep and shadowed, others shallow and fine as a hair's width. Between them, figures move silently, carrying long, narrow objects wrapped in pale cloth. They lay these objects gently on raised stone platforms, unwrapping them to reveal panels of dark, polished material, each inscribed with patterns that seem both precise and organic. Some of the figures work with delicate tools, tracing the patterns, adding marks so fine you can barely see them from where you stand. Others simply watch, hands folded, as though bearing witness is itself a form of work. The air is heavy here, not oppressive, but weighted with a sense of purpose that is impossible to ignore. At the far end of the room, a wide archway opens onto a balcony that juts out over a deep chasm. The chasm is lit from below by a faint, moving glow, like the reflection of firelight on water, though you can hear no flame or flow. The balcony's railing is low, its surface carved smooth by countless hands. You rest your palms there and feel a steady, slow vibration, almost like a heartbeat. From the balcony, a narrow stair spirals down along the chasm wall, each step carved directly into the stone. The glow grows brighter as you descend, until you see its source, a wide, still pool fed by a thin stream that falls from a crack high above. The pool's surface is scattered with pale fragments, drifting lazily as though carried by a current you cannot see. They catch the glow and send it rippling across the cavern walls, revealing faint markings, lines, circles, and patterns that seem to map something immense and unseen. The stair ends at the pool's edge, where a narrow path winds around its perimeter. You follow it, noting that the fragments in the water are not all alike. Some are translucent, others opaque, some smooth, others jagged. They never collide, though they drift close, as if repelled at the last moment. At the far side, the path leads into a tunnel where the sound of water becomes louder and sharper. Here, the stream you saw above runs alongside the path in a narrow channel. It flows quickly, the surface breaking over small stones, and its clarity reveals countless tiny shapes moving within too fast to study, yet each leaving a faint trail of light in its wake. The channel widens and deepens, becoming a long, still trough. Figures stand beside it, lowering narrow nets into the water, then lifting them to reveal strands of something pale and flexible, which they coil neatly into shallow baskets. The strands glisten faintly in the dim light, and as they dry, they seem to stiffen into delicate, thread-like lines. The tunnel bends sharply, and the sound of the water fades as quickly as it came. You find yourself in a high, narrow hall where the walls converge overhead into a sharp ridge. Thin beams of light filter down through slits in the ceiling, illuminating long, vertical banners that hang in pairs along the length of the hall. The banners are of a fabric so fine it seems almost like mist, yet the patterns woven into them are sharp and vivid, layers of shapes and colors that shift subtly as you move, revealing new details from each angle. At the hall's end, a set of double doors stands closed. They are made of dark, matte material, their surfaces unmarked save for a single, shallow indentation in the center. As you approach, the indentation deepens into a narrow recess, within which a faint glow begins to gather. The doors part without a sound, revealing a chamber bathed in soft, even light. The chamber is circular, its walls lined with shelves that hold objects of every conceivable form, spirals of glass, spheres of woven metal, small boxes carved from single pieces of stone. In the center, a round table supports a map of sorts, though it is not drawn or carved. Instead, it is formed of countless small, shifting pieces, each no larger than a fingernail, moving in slow patterns that change every time you blink. Some pieces rise and fall, others change color, and still others seem to merge or divide without leaving any trace of their movement behind. Figures stand around the table, watching the map intently. One reaches out, not to touch, but to gesture above a particular section, and the pieces there slow, rearranging themselves into a different pattern. Another figure makes a similar motion, and a section on the opposite side of the table shifts in response. The movements are precise, deliberate, yet the map never settles entirely. It is in constant motion, alive in its own way. You are not noticed as you watch, and after a time, you step quietly away, following a narrow side passage that leads out of the chamber. The passage slopes upward, and the air grows warmer again. The light shifts from white to a soft gold, and soon you emerge into an open space that seems impossibly high within the structure. The ceiling arches far above, and from it hang long chains that support platforms of various shapes and sizes. Some platforms are empty. Others hold objects, large crystals, coiled ropes, bowls of liquid that reflect the ceiling's height in perfect miniature. Ladders and narrow bridges connect the platforms, and you see figures moving between them with a calm ease, as though height and distance are irrelevant. The air here carries a faint musical resonance, though no instrument is visible. At the far end of the space, a single wide bridge leads to a doorway framed by 2 tall columns. Each column is carved with a spiral that winds from base to top, the grooves deep enough to cast shadows, even in the diffuse light. Beyond the doorway, a short hall leads to a balcony that opens not onto the plains or the chasm, but into a vast interior void. The void is filled with structures suspended in the air, rings, lattices, and webs of material, so fine they seem spun from light itself. They hang in perfect stillness, yet you sense they could move at any moment, like seeds waiting for a wind. Far below, the floor is lost in shadow, and far above, the ceiling is hidden in the same darkness. The scale is impossible to judge. The space could be the size of a great hall or a small city. You stand there for a long moment, feeling as though you are seeing not just another part of this place, but the very heart of its purpose, though you cannot name what that purpose is. Somewhere within the stillness, there is movement, a slow, deliberate shift that draws your eye. But by the time you focus on it, it is gone. The silence here is deeper than anywhere you have been before, a silence that seems to press gently against you, asking nothing, offering nothing, only existing.